Order. Good evening, everyone. I have a roll call.
Commissioner Cheney, precinct 1 and 1A.
Here.
Commissioner Cashline, precinct 2.
Here.
Commissioner Russo, precinct 3. Commissioner Laubach, precinct 4.
Here.
Judge Mills.
Here. Okay, we're going to strike item number 1 from the agenda, and we're going to bring it back on the 22nd for contract renewal and this resolution. Okay, so we'll go straight to presentation. I believe William is going to lead. Is that right? Or William, start.
That's correct. That's correct, Judge.
Go ahead.
All right. You get the presentation up.
I'm not in charge.
All right. Can I go ahead?
Sure.
Go ahead.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Really want to thank the judge and the commissioner's court for coming together for this special workshop. And the purpose of tonight is to try to explain as best we can one of the most important, rewarding, but complicated projects that the recovery team has taken on. Next slide. Under the state statutes, section 61 of the Texas Health and Safety Code, the county has a basic obligation and responsibility to try and provide healthcare services to its residents. And when Harvey came, he put a dent in that situation pretty heavily. And next slide. Part of what our team tried to do is to do a comprehensive assessment of what happened during Harvey, what damage was caused, what are the things that created barriers for the community, and our long-term recovery plan, which was put together with multiple public input sessions and communications with not only the commissioner's court, but many people in the community. We tried to put together a plan that would address some of these items and meet the community's needs. And one of the things that rose to the top of the list was the lack of access to good quality health care. And what was the community going to do about that issue, especially post-Harvey? The process, admittedly, has been very lengthy. It's been very complex. And we started probably a little before 2019, but documents on the effort that we're going to talk to you about tonight go all the way back to 2019. And the application itself was for the grant to do the medical facility was put in late August of 2019, but it wasn't awarded until October of last year, 2020. During this project and throughout the recovery plan, we've had to remain very, very flexible and adjust to the changing market conditions that kept getting thrown our way. It wasn't just Harvey. You've got the pandemic, and then of course you have the medical services industry itself undergoing changes all through this time. So our team explored many different approaches to deliver better service and improve access to medical care in Aransas County. And we didn't do that just on our own. We went out and we sought some partners in this effort. And again, I want to thank the judge and the commissioner's court for the support you provided in this process, because you authorized us to work with the Texas A&M School of Rural Medical services. You know, they've helped us. We've consulted with multiple experts along the way. And now that the grant has been awarded to the community, we have to move forward with it. And what we want to do is try to walk you through some of the difficulties and challenges that we've had to overcome and we've encountered as part of this process. Thank you, Kim. So let's do a little flashback here. In August of 2017, when Harvey came ashore, as you know, there was an additional medical facility offering services in the Coastal Bend area. A lot of residents from Aransas County went and used these facilities, but that was closed due to Harvey. There was also a Twin Fountains urgent care location that was closed. And you know, we initiated, as I said, back in 2019, studies to see if a micro hospital, which was the market's answer to the failure of medical facilities throughout Texas. In other words, you right size it. You don't build it too big. You try to use economies of scale and deliver a product called micro hospital. So we worked with Texas A&M University, who has a lot of expertise in the delivering rural medical services. And the magic of the August 2019 date for completing that study and for initiating that effort was the fact that our team felt very strongly in our analysis that we would qualify, that this project would qualify, I might add, the project would qualify for a CDBG DR grant under their national HUD objectives, which is to meet an urgent need. And if you go back to that time, it's hard to think of a need that the community had that was more urgent than providing better access to medical care. So we felt very strongly that it would qualify, but the deadline for submitting the grant was August of 2019. So we reached out to Texas A&M to do this study, and they took into account, and we incorporated into our grant application, 2 sites. One site was the old Code 3 facility at the ACMSI property, which we'll get into in just a minute. And then site B was the Little Bay property, which was an elementary school that was put up for excess sale by the Aransas County Independent School District. So we tried working it out to where we would just have one site for the grant application, but the deadline was approaching and we just needed to put it in and work through the process. So we decided to submit both. And the initial focus was on the Little Bay primary site. But as we moved forward in the process and the pandemic set in, that began to shift the market and shift the circumstances around which the grant could be supportive. Next slide. So we updated the feasibility study and our data. And in fact, there was, during this time between August of 2019 and the time when the grant was awarded, we must have had, I don't know how many calls with GLO, how many back and forth, how many questions, what they call RFIs, requests for additional information, back and forth, trying to clarify the market, clarify the situation, clarify what was happening on the ground and what our proposed solution would do to improve the situation on the ground. We got through basically all of that. And finally, the Corpus Christi Medical Center secured the lease with the old Code 3 property with ACMSI, and that began to gel are thinking about where the best site would be, what makes the most sense for the community, what makes the most sense economically, and what makes the most sense for medical providers in the market of the Rockport area. And finally, the grant came through in October of 2020. And as we had said all along, it met the national objective. It qualified for the grant. So we were happy about that because the CBDG DR grant, if you recall, when we did our public presentations, it was a $53.8 million grant, and this project was $10.4 million of that $53 million. And it has zero match. Basically, it is a 100% grant, which is a very rare thing, and why it's so valuable for us to line this thing up, make sure it qualified, and get the grant award. So that's what our team focused on for months and months and months. And we really couldn't go out after the grant was submitted and talk about a lot of these things because we were still in negotiations with various scenarios. And we just kept rolling with the punches and trying to make a grant application that would ultimately be successful. And of course, we did do that. We basically have gone back and forth with the landowner, which is the Aransas County Medical Services, Inc. They're the ones that operate your ambulance service. They're the ones that have the hospice center there. They now have the Corpus Christi Medical Center there operating where the old Code 3 facility was. So there's a nucleus now of medical services that's being provided in the community. And now you have a chance to add a $10 million zero match grant to the equation and see what you can do to push the envelope forward and provide even better better medical care in this situation. And I might add that we found during the pandemic, the reason that the Code 3 facility failed was not because there wasn't demand for medical services in the area. The reason Code 3 failed was they had a flawed business model and they could not accept the Medicare and Medicaid insurances that would make them financially viable. And in fact, we now understand that there's a very good brisk business being done out of the old Code 3 facility. And we feel very good about the arrangement that we are proposing. So basically, we have now finished the negotiations with the landowner, ACMSI. We have completed that document. We've been given a copy of it. It's been approved by their board, but it has not been signed off, obviously, by the county commission. It has not been approved by the GLO. So let me just kind of set the stage for you, if I could. What we have is a grant from GLO with all the federal strings that come with that. Then we have a local partnership that we're trying to make sure fits all of those strings and delivers a product that's useful to the community. And what we see here is an opportunity to enhance and improve medical services for Aransas County for years and years and years to come through use of this CBDG DR grant. However, with any grant, as you know, there are compliance things that have to be taken into account. And we feel very positive about the partnership we've worked out now. We think it makes sense from an economics perspective, from an on-the-ground operational perspective. And now we're going to try to work through, okay, what are the challenges that we have to overcome from a federal perspective to make sure that there's no issues there with the funding that is going to flow from HUD, Washington to Austin, Texas, GLO, down to the county. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my partner, Ms. Kim, And Kim and I collaborated on this with multiple attorneys and people to negotiate this draft agreement. And I'm going to ask Kim to kind of walk you through not every detail of it, but hit the highlights so that you understand the structure in which we're trying to deliver these improved medical services. Kim?
Wait a minute, I need to make one correction on your presentation. William, ACMSI is not in charge of the ambulance service. They are the landlords to the ambulance service. So
Correct. I'm sorry, Judge, that it's cited on their property and they work with the county on that. I'm sorry, that's my bad.
But they're also the landlords for the emergency room. HCA is in charge of the emergency room.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to go over a couple of documents. One is a memorandum of understanding, and that would be a memorandum of understanding between Aransas County and ACMSI. And I'm going to go over the highlights of that. As our partner and as the owner of the property, of the land that we would be proposing. The other element that I'm going to be going over is some highlights of a request for proposal. And a request for proposal is required by the GLO in order to recruit a medical facility and related operator. And so when you mesh these two together, they have a lot of commonality. So I'm not going to go over things twice. I'm first going to go over the elements that we have to have in the MOU with the landowner. And then secondly, I'll go over the remaining points that are in the request for proposal. Again, it's highlights, it's not all inclusive. Requests for proposals are very long and very detailed, but we will go over the main points. As William mentioned, the site is technically in the 400 block of Enterprise Boulevard. ACMSI is the owner of the site. And what we first talked about is that RFP, that agreement says we're going to work together on this. We have a draft. We'll be working with them to review it, get feedback. And of course, that draft of the request for proposal is subject to the General Land Office approval as well. Part of the process for that RFP is establishing a committee and having an independent committee do an evaluation of the proposals that come in. It would be a very inclusive type committee with a lot of expertise in the medical field. And of course, both of the partners for this would also be on the committee, with the county having its representative as well as ACMI. The operator that's proposed, we're acknowledging that operator could be a nonprofit. It can be a for-profit as well under the grant. So what are we trying to do with this? With our partnership with the landowner, as well as through our request for proposal, we're really trying to look at and open it up and say what kind of facilities that are medical that fit under the CDBG criteria, what will our market support? We want the private sector to respond back and tell us what is going to be most successful in the market. And as we've gone through and done our evaluations, we've been able to open up and look at other types of uses in addition to the micro-hospital. So currently the MOU and the RFP outline that we're looking for a micro-hospital. Is anyone interested in doing that? What are your qualifications? A surgical and procedure center. That's another type that fits the urgent need and would meet the grant criteria, and opening up for that. Maybe some other type of healthcare center, or a clinic, a medical clinic with general and specialty type of uses. The MOU has to stay pretty broad until the RFP comes into place, because we don't know what the market is going to respond to. And so we don't know exactly what the size or configuration is going to be. And the idea is it outlines that we're going to work together on the design. We'll work together with whoever the operator is to get the right size and configuration of the facility so that it's successful. And one of the big things is, and you'll see this in the RFP, it has to stay in budget. If it's not in budget, what is proposed by a private sector entity, then they are responsible for the difference. So there is a cutoff point. We have the resources that we've been given. That's what we have to work with. And if a private entity wants to do more, that's certainly welcome, but it would be paid for by the private sector. Because it's a federal grant, the county would be handling the procurement. We have lots of regulations that we have to meet. We would be the ones that handle dealing with the environmentals, the bids, and the construction of the facility. There will be probably expertise that comes out of our proposer that can help with some of the specifications and that type of thing, and we'll certainly work with them on that. Once the facility is complete and we have a certificate of occupancy for it and the tenant is ready to move in, then it's our desire, and what the contract, the MOU currently says, is that we will turn the ownership over to ACMSI. They are a qualified entity in order to own that. If for any reason it's deemed by the GLO that we cannot transfer the ownership of the facility, then it would be by long-term lease. And as the other thing, and this is in the RFP, is once we go through the request for proposal process, the committee vets which entity, what proposal they think is best for the community and meets our needs, and it will be most successful. Then we would go into negotiations for an operating and management agreement for the facility. Our partner, ACMSI, would be part of that, and it would probably be a tri-party agreement. There are provisions currently in the RFP, and it's referenced in the MOU, that the county does have a indigent care fund, and that those funds may be accessed depending on if it's allowable by law, and that would be negotiated and would be in the operating agreement once we know what kind of facility it is and what the character of their customers would be. We also, everybody, no matter what, everybody has to follow the General Land Office requirements and all of the federal statutes. That has to be in every single agreement with an accent on that. And so we have this draft of an MOU. We have worked with ACMSI on it. Their board has looked at it, and they've expressed agreement with it. We'll talk about a couple of topics that we have that may have to be enhanced some in a minute, but generally speaking, have been in agreement with the general concept and the things that I've outlined. We have not submitted the agreement for GLO to review. We needed to get feedback from the Commissioners Court and also the initial feedback that we're getting from GLO before that is submitted. Now, I want to make a point about my PowerPoint. If I changed any words at all on the PowerPoint, they are highlighted in yellow, except for the title. So I had something else in there. I think it may have said Commissioners Court action. That's not going to happen until everybody's in agreement with the content of the final MOU. Review has been done by the GLO, and we feel comfortable that that's going to be the final agreement. And that's why I've got emphasis on feedback as opposed to the phraseology I had before. Now, so we have talked to the GLO about opening this up and having different types of medical facility uses, and they're receptive to that. We've also got other things we have to talk to them about, like an extension on time if we need it. And so we did talk to them. We had a general conversation. It was a 20,000-foot conversation about what we were thinking about and how we'd like to proceed. They did indicate, they talked a lot on their own about what kind of things they would like to see addressed in the MOU. Specifically, there's provisions, and it is in the MOU. We may want to strengthen that language some. We'll see about program income. And this has been the case since day one. It's the case for every single federally funded project. The grant recipient cannot make a profit off of a facility that's funded with federal funds. And so we're allowed to recover our costs, but we can't make a profit. And that would apply both to ACMSI and to the county. It flows all the way through. Whatever the county has to meet, ACMSI would have to meet as well as a partner. So that's one item. Probably need to add something about, okay, what happens if we need to sell the property? And there's some circumstances where that could happen. Let's say that the firm that and the medical facility that opens up at some point says, oh, we don't want to operate anymore. We don't want to do this anymore. If that happened, we would go out and look for a substitute that could come in and provide medical services that would meet the urgent need that was expressed in the original grant. But if, let's say, everything fell apart, then we need to have a provision in the final agreement that talks about what happens with the sale and how are those proceeds distributed. And also potentially a little bit more language about change of use. Whoops. So additional information on this is now on the RFP, and so we're developing it more. We're taking the basis of what you just heard about the memorandum of understanding and kind of talking about what would be in the RFP. And so it's the same concept, private sector driven, market driven, what's going to be most feasible and successful based on our profile. Now, we're looking now at including in the RFP allowance and receiving proposals on several different types of medical facilities. I have highlighted the word base level because we have taken out a tiered system of priority. So that is no longer the case. We're opening it up and saying, okay, here are and this is based on some conversations with the GLO. We would like an outpatient facility, let's say a surgery center or a procedure and a procedure room and all the things that come with it, pre-op, post-op, PACU. A lab, imaging, especially imaging, we don't have in town. So that would be something that someone could propose on. And then all the ancillary things that go with that. It also still includes asking the question for a micro hospital. Based on what A&M has told us, they think the right sizing for a micro hospital here in town would be 2 to 8 beds. And so that's in there, and it says, does anyone want to do a micro hospital? There are additional points in the evaluation system that give more points to if you propose a micro hospital. So it is showing some favor for that type of facility, but then it also allows for people to propose on other types of facilities. And I mentioned earlier, medical office, clinic, that's also something that we list. And it also says, hey, maybe there's some things we haven't thought about, or maybe there's some, especially some things that would really work well and is needed in our community, and they can propose for that too, as long as it meets the GLO requirements for the box that we have to operate out of. And so that language down there about, I think I talked about it before, if there's some additional facilities that take us out of budget, then that's on the private sector ticket. We only do what we can do with the grant. And otherwise, if they want to add another component at their expense, we'll certainly take a look at that by the committee.
Kim,
Yes, ma'am.
are we still planning to borrow money to put more to sweeten this deal and add, several $1 million worth of equipment and so forth?
So on the equipment, that's limited to a micro hospital. And so what we'll be looking for is if the current RFP says there are certain circumstances and proposals that, the equipment might be available for, and others there are not. And it's very clear in the RFP that that's the case.
So we are still planning to borrow money
No,
to fund
No.
equipment if it's a micro
No.
hospital, but not other.
No, we don't know. Okay, we don't know the answer to that question. Let's say that we do get a qualified micro hospital. Then it's subject to negotiation as to whether there's any dialogue or not about that.
Okay, so that's one of our options still. We're just not sure if we're going to pursue it.
Correct.
correct. It would have to be a proper response to the RFP, and it would have to be something that would be economically viable. There's a whole bunch of criteria it would have to meet. And if I could, Kim, I'd like to just quickly break down the budget just so the commission can understand it a little bit better. You recall I said it was $10.4 million zero match, right? 8.8 million of it is for the construction of the facility. The remaining amount of money, the difference between 8.8 million in construction and 10.4, is for hiring an architect, for doing the environmental work, for making sure we have grant administration and follow all the rules. So that's the breakdown of the grant. And the only reason that the equipment conversation even came up was because GLO was concerned at the time we were negotiating the grant award that we might not have enough money for medical equipment. That's the only reason the conversation even happened. So we are tightening down the requirements, and it had to be a high bar before we would go there, because it basically puts us in a situation where we would have to, initiate that activity on $1.3 million. And, it would have to be a pretty special proposal for us to want to go there.
I also want to add for the 1.37 million, one of the reasons why GLO asked us about that and to pursue it is because equipment is not an eligible expense under the grant. Now, if it's a permanent fixture, that's one thing, but anything that has any kind of movability to it, that's not eligible under the grant. And so they were looking at all the documentation that we looked at, that we submitted, and said, hey, we think that you need a safety belt and potentially may need these extra resources, especially since equipment is not covered in the grant. So that's where the topic came up in the very initial place.
And could you talk a little?
Yeah.
But come up, the people at home can't hear you unless you actually talk into the mic.
Sorry, Kim, let me help you out with that real quick. So Patricia Arnold with Aransas County Medical Services. Some of the things that we discussed about that before moving forward with the long-term recovery team is that the hospital operator prefers their own equipment. And so the equipment that they're bringing in, even to the new ER, that's a cost that they would consume or assume on their own. And usually they prefer it that way because they already have certain contracts with certain people that can update the equipment and insure it and different things like that. So that was one of the things that didn't really concern us. So I just thought I would share that with everyone in the room.
And could
Yeah,
you talk
and
to us a little bit about the confidentiality provisions? You and I mentioned this on the phone.
Yes. Okay. So everyone, we've put, and I just want to mention this to the public because I think it's significant and fantastic. We've been able to work out a way to put the agenda packets out on the internet. So when we post a agenda item for the Commissioners Court, the public will have access to all of the materials that don't fit the real estate and personnel type categories for executive session. But all of the materials will be out there on the internet for everyone to take a look at. And so what Commissioner Laubach is talking about is this MOU is out on the internet right now, so everybody can kind of take a look at the specifics in more detail. No,
I'm really talking
one
about
of the provisions, yes, ma'am, is there's a paragraph on confidentiality, and that particular language came straight out of a recommended document. It's a general land office document that they use for transactions for acquisition of property. And so we used a lot of different resources to come up with the MOU and try to make sure that we were touching all bases. So there's language in there for confidentiality and we're going to be able to give you a more distinct answer about what that language is trying to accomplish. We'll want to go into that for detail, but it is from a contract, sample contract that we were given, and we're trying to cover all the bases. There's other language in there from what's the contract that we looked at that was GLO about records management and access to the property and records, which is also a requirement from the federal government.
But the general idea is that while this process of negotiation is going on during the next several months, I guess at least, the public will be given access to information about what's under consideration. It's not going to be considered all confidential under the MOU.
That's correct.
Right.
Now
that we have a site, that changes the equation quite a bit.
Yeah. So we will still have some confidentiality issues related to the request for proposal, and this is standard in all of our contracts. If someone is requested to give proprietary information about their company, then they can note that in their proposal, and then if we get a request for that information, then we send it to the Attorney General's office for an opinion whether they deem it proprietary. And that's in there, that's in the RFP, that's standard language that we've tried to put in most of our contracts because that's how it's recommended in all cases related to private firm confidential information. But
Tim, have you
do understand
gone through all
the
the
concern of
slides? Next slide.
Yeah. So we did talk about, that it does talk about in the RFP an equipment use agreement, but that would be only under very special circumstances related to the micro hospital. We are asking for information like what's your startup budget? What do you think the preliminary construction cost would be for the type of facility that you would be asking us to build in order for your operations? And we also want some forecast on the indigent care and how that is part of their mix. There are some across the board type of eligibility requirements. If a license is required in order to operate the facility, they will have had to have a license previously and that it been held in good condition. They don't necessarily have to have one right now, but have operated and had a valid license. We have to have a facility that takes Medicare and Medicaid because in most cases that has a significant impact on a pro forma. We'll ask for financial stability, and there's some specific things in there about that. And then a clean operation. All of the documents with the state show a clean record. And then, of course, there are a lot of other things, general provisions in there about state and local and federal requirements and insurance requirements as well. So what are the next steps? Next step is we're going to be engaging the GLO again, finding out what kind of documents and revisions that they would like to see. And part of that will be they'll ask for a schedule, an updated schedule based on where we are right now. We'll have a letter of request that talks about opening this up and allowing for other types of medical facilities. And they're going to want some supporting documentation. There's tables and some things like that we have to turn in that talk about costs and that type of thing. Once we get feedback on the MOU, we submit it, we get feedback on the MOU, then we would bring this back to ACMSI and the Commissioners Court for consideration. And then if that goes through, then we would form our committee that would be looking at the RFPs and start getting ready for that and coordinate that effort with the A&M division that we've been working with in the past. And then we'd start off with our schedule. We do have a tentative schedule that's month by month, the things that all the laborious types of steps that we have to take. There's an environmental process. We, of course, have the RFP that we have to issue for an operator. And of course, the recommendations of the committee would then come back to the Commissioners Court for consideration. There are multiple procurements for design, environmental, et cetera, that have to happen, as well as a lot of other steps. But that's kind of where we're at right now, is that we had to get the site nailed down and make sure that we were going to be able to hone in on one site. And we have to talk about, do we, can we get permission from the GLO for the additional facilities as well as extension? So, so far, the initial discussion that we had with them, again, at a 20,000 foot level, they were receptive. They liked the idea of expanding the uses because that makes things more viable. It makes the market respond and tell us what is best and can be supported for the community. Of course, we'll ultimately decide that because we're in charge of the RFP and the award for that.
Kim, what would you say is the minimum you could expect for a time before something was actually built and put in use? Are we talking years?
William, do you want?
Yeah, we have to meet a grant schedule. That's one of the conversations we're going to have with GLO. They will tell us when we have to have this thing done. And right now, once the clock is ticking, so we have to ask for an extension. They awarded in October, so we need to make sure that we have a full 2 years to deliver.
Okay, so
we're
we think we
looking
need
at
at least
2023 probably in terms of what we're going to be looking at to build and open.
But we will, in all likelihood, need that extension, and we're asking for it because, the award, we signed the contracts in October, and as William is indicating, the clock has started. And some of these processes take a while, especially environmental.
No, that's why I'm asking. I'm not asking so much, can we meet a GLO deadline? I'm just asking, how long do you think in a perfect world? So I think I'm hearing 2 years.
Yeah, 2 years.
2+.
Yeah.
That's why we're asking for an extension. And one of the positive things that has happened is GLO has its hands tied too, because they're dealing with HUD money.
Sure.
And HUD has already come out with a determination that they are willing to authorize extensions. That's not always the case, but for this event, disaster event, they have given that indication. That
and I'm not trying to hold you to 2 years. I'm trying to find a minimum. I understand it could be more depending on how things go.
Yeah. The Federal Register, there's a Federal Register notice out that was put out last summer that gives us the right to ask for the extension. So we feel very comfortable we can get this thing done.
Are we on discussion now, Judge?
If it comes through.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I just I forgot to mention, Commissioner Russo is not here because she went to Robstown to get her second shot at 2 o'clock or 2:30. She expected to be back, but they had a hiccup. She's not back because of that hiccup, or she would be here. So therefore, I'll open it up to discussion with the commissioners.
Okay, I have several questions, if I may, and I might invite Pat to come back to the podium.
Okay, I need to say that again because I turned my mic off while Kim was on. Commissioner Russo is not here because she went to Robstown to get her second vaccine shot. And because of a hiccup over there, she is hopefully on her way home by now, but we don't know.
But if I could add, she called knowing she'd be late and asked me to ask certain questions since they were largely the same ones I was going to ask. The questions I asked kind of cover her concerns as well as mine.
Okay, thank you. All right, Mr. Cheney.
Okay, I have just about 3 questions here. I was confused, Kim and Pat, I was confused about whenever you were talking about the ownership. If we're talking about on ACMSI property, doesn't ACMSI property already own that? Are we going to build a building, or what are we going to do to get to the point where the county has ownership?
So-
I don't know
Yeah.
whether that's an accurate term, or that was just a term used, or,
Currently, okay, they own the land.
right.
And we have an MOU, an agreement that the building, we're working together, and that a new building would be constructed on their land. Immediately upon certificate of occupancy, the ownership of the building goes to ACMSI that's what they do. I mean, they were mentioning earlier, they've got leases for multiple medical facilities. So they're most qualified to be the landlord and have the resources assigned for that kind of activity. So we would be transferring the property to them, and they would oversee it. They're still bound by all of the requirements that the county has to meet.
Okay. Well, then that begs the second question is, once they take ownership of the building, what is the county's part of doing this? If we're not going to operate it as such, it's going to be owned by the Aransas County Medical Services, and it's going to be run by the operator that we get to do it. What is the county's legal position in that organization at that point?
We have to ensure compliance with all federal and state regulations that we've coveted
So
through
does
the
that make
grant.
us an overseer, like a governing body? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also one other role, which is, if they have expenses that are eligible for indigent
Who
care,
is they?
the operator.
Okay.
If the operator has expenses that are eligible for delivering medical services to eligible people, then they can access funds that the county has for that, designated for that purpose.
Okay.
It depends on the type of operator.
Right.
So if they're getting a nonprofit or an FQHC, or it just depends on the type of operator that's in there. If they're,
Okay.
require assistance or not. So we have that embedded in the MOU just in case.
But we're currently funding people with healthcare sales tax money
Yeah.
to do the same thing as they would be doing.
Right.
Now, if it goes beyond the healthcare sales tax, will the county be on the hook for funding the additional expenses? And if so, how are we going to control that?
No,
Know what?
if it goes beyond that, the agreements we have in place says, you can be reimbursed with the resources that are available, and that's it.
Okay.
You would present it to the commissioner's court, much like some of the other.
And would-
nonprofits come in and-
Things funded through the healthcare sales tax, would they still go through the procedure they go through now with through the treasurer's office, where they're qualifying people that?
Sure.
They would
Qualify.
qualify the reimbursement. Yes.
We're
And
not
there's
talking about
actually.
just turning over the money to them.
Right. No, it has to be qualified. There's
Okay.
there's qualifying language, even though we don't have an operating agreement yet, because we don't know the nature of the facility. In the RFP, it's very clear that there's a limitation. Right now, we've put a cap noted on there of 1.2 million, which was some analysis that was originally done. And they have to qualify, and they have to go through this same procedure, qualifying the expense and making the request through the appropriate office.
And following along with that, how would the county auditor, is the operator going to have to audit their books in compliance with the county auditor each year to make sure that, number one, they're getting paid what they need to be paid? Or,
I can respond to that, Kim. Basically, there are audit requirements that come with the federal monies. And as the county is the holder of the grant, we go through our normal audit process, and then we communicate with these operations that are where the money's flowing through, and everything lines up and gets reported through our normal audit.
And at what point will we make the decision whether we're going to go 2 or 8 beds? You know, we're talking about micro hospital here, but in one way, we're talking about really an expanded emergency room or the special care. And then, you know, we're also talking about the hospital. That's all in one unit, I would suspect. That with a 2-year time frame, somebody's got to make a decision pretty quick how many beds we're going to put in there and how long they're going to go and what we can be authorized to do.
It will be determined by the proposers themselves. They're going to have done their analyses and they'll propose and tell us what will work in our community. And then the evaluation committee will take a look at that. They'll have dialogue with the proposer. That may change the conversation, you know, some, and they'll talk about what the right sizing is. But the private sector has to be willing. They're the driver of what's going to be proposed first,
Okay.
and we'll have the conversation. And the committee differ. Maybe they think we need another bed or whatever, and they'll have that conversation before they make a recommendation to the Commissioner's Court.
And I have one more question. Why would the county even consider negotiating with a provider that was not properly licensed? What would be a condition that we would ever do that?
We wouldn't. That's why it's in writing in the RFP.
Yeah, the RFP says you must have have been licensed or currently have a license to conduct whatever you're proposing.
That's 2 entirely different sides of it.
It is, but they would have to get licensed before, you know, that's part of the mix of the evaluation that they might have to relicense themselves. In all likelihood, they're well deep into the business and already have other locations, and they'll just point to whatever license they have. But it's just a minimum that you want to put in every single, you want to be clear about, we really don't want to see any proposals from somebody that's not done this before, you know, and that's one way of clarifying
You're
that.
sort of talking about somebody who might be licensed elsewhere and they would need a new license only in the sense of expanding their license to include our area.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, if say they were licensed in another state as a wild example, but the point is the grant provisions require that they provide service when the doors open. So that was another question that we went back and forth with GLO, and they made sure that requirement was in.
Okay, that's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Commissioner Lovett, you have questions from Commissioner Russo also?
I lumped them all together. We were really asking the same question.
Okay. Any other questions from the commissioners? I'm asking from the commissioners right now. Okay. Any other questions from the commissioners? Okay, we're going to go to the public hearing part, and Ms. Rhodes, would you like to step up? Announce your name, please.
My name is Mary Lynn Rhodes, and I've been a resident of Aransas County for 23 plus years. There was one thing that was mentioned, and it didn't fit in my brain. ACMSI is a not-for-profit, but we can hire an operator that is for-profit. How does that work?
You want me to take that?
Yeah,
Judge?
better you than me.
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, what we're doing, ma'am, is we're building a facility that would provide medical services on land that's owned by ACMSI, which is not for profit. And the GLO rules allow us to put an operator in that space to deliver the service, be it in operations or procedures or hospital or whatever. And they can make a profit if that's part of their business model. But we, as the county and ACMSI as a not-for-profit partner of the county, cannot make a profit. So that's the difference as we understand it under the GLO rules. And I think it all flows together and makes sense.
Can I answer your question, ma'am? Okay, Mark Orr.
My name is Mark Goer. I've been a resident in Aransas County for 35 plus years. I just am very much in favor of getting a medical facility here for a lot of different reasons. Real estate, number one, retaining people here in our community for another. But I'm coming to you all on a little bit different deal. I understand the site's been selected. Really hasn't gone out to the public. I haven't been asked about what I would think that a proper site would be. I've been in great discussion with actual people who operate these kind of facilities. And there's a lot of options that need to be met. You know, the primary care, specialty care, cardio, respiratory imaging lab, the surgical center with the 6 to 8 bed facility is something that most of my people have said is what actually makes money, right? Or actually is operational. So in my opinion, there should be any existing building that might require less capital or repurpose the closed or vacant properties such as 2621 Highway 35, which is the old building, the urgent care center that we have. It's 12,000 square foot building, 2-story. And I think that it should be an option to be considered. You're going to have none of the phase one. It's already done. The building is already there. We could add the surgicals to the property. And I've talked to Phil, the owner of Ace Hardware, and he's willing to allow us to use his parking lot for any additional offsite parking that we may need. So I think I've listened to all this, but I think you can get that building for considerably less than what you're going to build this new stuff for. And I think it should be looked at. So.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Callahan. Tim Callahan, are you online? You don't see him? Pardon? Okay. Kathy Kane. Ms. Kane?
Oh, I'm here.
Oh, there you are.
You're not used to seeing me here, so
Yeah.
usually Wendy gets to be my spokesperson, but
It's 5
today
o'clock, so you
it's
can
5
come.
o'clock, so I could come from work. So let me just first say, Kathy Kane, a resident of Aransas County. I'm grateful the county is working with ACMSI to bring the needed healthcare service here. I'm also pleased to hear that this project is embracing the RFP process to solicit a potential partner. My experience with managing healthcare EHR projects has taught me gaining support from the end user community is an integral factor for project success. So I recommend the selection committee include citizen representatives outside of anyone from this court or ACMSI. This community involvement will help us ensure what is being built is what is needed and within our financial constraints. My concern today was kind of addressed, but I'll still state it. It's really related to Proposition C, which was approved in November for a micro hospital. And my question is, are you planning to use that bond money? Which I think I heard we weren't. So my comment is, please don't. The citizens supported a bond to build a hospital. They did not support a bond to build a to-be-determined medical facility. If funding is needed beyond the grant, bring that detailed project to the citizens and ask for a bond with full transparency. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And there's 2 other people here, but they're here. They were announced that they were here. They didn't want to speak. Both of them are for the project, so I'll let that rest. So there's no one else that signed up. Did you sign up, sir?
No, sir, there's a question. It's not stated.
Okay. Come on up to the mic. You have 5 minutes.
It's a quick question.
Where are we along in the RFP process?
Name.
Oh, Jeff Hutt. Where are we in the RFP process? Where are we not in the process along? I know the GLO gives us dates and we're supposed to be at milestones. Have we started that calendar process yet? And if so, where are we within that process? And when does it have to be completed by?
William, you want to answer that?
Yes, sir. The clock started in October when we received the grant. But as we mentioned earlier, there is a provision in the Federal Register where we can ask for a reset of the clock and an extension. As far as the RFP is concerned, Kim and I have worked with the GrantWorks team, attorneys, and multiple other parties to draft the RFP. That document is still pending GLO review and will be sent to them probably in the next week. And once we reach consensus with them and we have a, feel that ACMSI and the county are ready to move forward, we'll issue the RFP and begin answering more questions, because we won't really know the nature of the project until we get a response from the private sector market.
Yes.
So you said you can extend the time. What is the date that is that end time that you're extending from? Is there any date termination for the end of this grant?
Right now, the termination point for us is 2 years from the award, as I understand it. So it would be 2 years from October 4 or thereabouts.
We would have to have the building built and occupied.
Correct.
When will the RFP process be due?
Without an extension.
Without an extension.
We typically put RFPs out for 30 to 45 days. You have to allow for adequate time for people to respond.
William, I think he's asking what's the deadline for getting the RFP out, not for getting
there's no deadline at this point. We're trying to get the process in place, GLO agreement to that process, and then we're ready to go.
When do we expect to have the RFPs going out? Reasonably.
Yeah, if you'd ask me, probably in 2 weeks, but we've still got to take into account GLO's cooperation in that matter. So I would say by
taking
next month.
into
I would
account
say
GLOs.
Next month, I'm hopeful, but again, I cannot speak for GLO.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
I don't know if anybody else has signed up to speak. I just thought I would pass along the gist of comments I've gotten from people I've talked to in the last week or so, and that is a lot of feeling for some kind of urgent care facility. I think we all understand there'd be all kinds of medical services that would be handy to have here, but a lot of them you can get half an hour away in Portland, whereas if you want something like stitches or late night treatment for a UTI, having something in town would be great. So whatever we built, there's a lot of enthusiasm for it to include some kind of urgent care services, because the current ER, great as it is strictly an ER, not an urgent. So you really can't get it kind of reasonably priced, non-emergent, but urgent care. So that's the feedback I got.
That could be, it sounds like that could depend on what a vendor might want to do.
Sure.
If you got to have one pop up that wants.
Exactly.
To
The
put it in
market has to like it. I'm just saying that's what I'm hearing from the end users for what it's worth.
Okay, thank you. Anything else? If not, thank you for showing up and showing your interest in the medical services that we hope to get for Aransas County and for its citizens. Appreciate it. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll
Motion
second
made.
that.
Do I have a second? Yeah, we did.